So this panel session today will explore some of the novel developments in Australia and overseas, and how investment in recycling and also energy recovery facilities is growing rapidly to reduce our dependence on landfill. And many of you may have seen the recent report from the ABS, which was released last month, showing that as a country we're now recycling 58% of all waste. So of the total waste generation of 53 million tonnes a year, we're actually recovering 30.8 million tonnes per annum, which is a fantastic achievement. And a lot of those materials are going into productive markets and back into the productive economy. And when you actually look at the figures tell a very interesting story. So the value of the waste collection and processing industry nationally is now valued at $10.4 billion. But when you actually look at the value of the recycled materials or recovered materials being sold into markets, that's now peaking at about $5.5 billion a year, and that's growing at about 18% every couple of years. So that's showing that the resource recovery industry is having a major contribution to the Australian economy. But despite these major changes and improvements in resource recovery and development of markets, the impacts of overseas markets are also influencing our country. So at the moment, about 60% of all recovered materials are consumed locally, but 40%, quite incredibly, is now exported. And when you look at our manufacturing industry and where our products are generally manufactured now, a lot of it's occurring overseas. So it makes sense from a circular economy point of view that our resources are now in significant demand overseas. So we heard yesterday about some of the major reforms being introduced by the New South Wales government in particular, and how that's driving the waste sector to improve resource recovery through investment in new facilities, also investment in energy recovery facilities, plus also the regulatory settings have changed significantly in this state as well. So the thresholds for licensing have now dropped, so a lot of the smaller operators are now being licensed, and there's a clearer regulatory framework in relation to the processing and use of materials as well. So today our panel of illustrious national and international industry and regulatory experts in this space will provide their own views of when waste is not a waste and the future products from waste streams. So to now hand over to the panel, and if it's okay, Andy, I'll get you to go first. So Andy Hill is the Head of Organics and Alternate Fuels for Suez UK. So Andy has worked in the UK organic and alternate fuels sector for over 10 years, with the last 6 years in SITA UK. Andy's particular focus is on the commercial development of alternate fuels for wood, RDF and SRF markets, development of fuel production facilities and associated supply chains, including logistics, ports and shipping. Please welcome Andy.
Thank you, Mark. I think you've just taken most of my introduction, so I appreciate that. Absolutely, I've been in the industry for just over 11 years now. I had the interesting experience of working both for SMEs, for entrepreneurial innovative businesses. That's where I started in the industry, and then the last 6 years in the corporate. Sorry, is that better?
Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so and in those 5 years working for the SME, that was focused on organics, which for us was green, food and wood business. We also had quite a large soil recycling operation. And what was interesting about that business was that of 150,000 tonnes a year it was taking, or processing, only 1,000 tonnes went to landfill. So it was a really clever business and focused on end market development and creating pull markets to really utilise the resources that were being handled. And for me, one of the key messages today, which we hear from everybody anyway, is absolutely think about it as a resource. Now that was an interesting model for SITA, so I left ECO and went to work for SITA, and we tried to replicate that and have replicated that over the last 6 years. And what we've seen, what our experience has been, is that where we've recycled the organics through the traditional methods of composting, whether that's just normal aeration or through in-vessel composting, anaerobic digestion for the food, we've also started to really develop the energy markets. So we do a lot of recycled wood within Suez UK. At the moment we're doing about 450,000 tonnes a year, and if you went back 5 years ago we weren't doing anything at all. Now the vast majority of that recycled wood will go into the energy markets. We export quite a bit across to Scandinavia and into Northern Europe. And because we started to develop those markets, there was a natural extension and natural development into energy from other materials. So we started off building and supplying facilities that required what we would call an RDF. So that was a lower energy fuel, lower grade fuel, predominantly made from municipal sources, and that would go into standard or existing EFW facilities. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, which maybe we'll explore a little bit later. And then what we found was actually there was a really interesting market, to be fair, it had already been developed, but we hadn't really tapped into, but we are now going for in a really big way, which is for the SRF, so a very highly processed fuel, and that's moving into the cement industry. And we're looking to develop other heavy industries as well. Okay. I think if I just do one quick anecdote, am I okay for time?
Yeah, good.
Okay. And apologies to those I already said this to, but I was struck, and I reminded myself a couple of days ago that I was watching a programme back in the UK a couple of months ago on waste. There's quite a big thing about waste education at the moment, so we're seeing a lot of programmes just on regular and mainstream TV in the UK. And this was showing the example of a municipality. It was Birmingham, second biggest city in the UK, and they at the time were controlling their own collection vehicles and their own depots. And they were going around collecting municipal material. They were bringing it back to the depot, and they were bag splitting, sorting the material, extracting the recycling that they could, extracting the metals, and then they had a small incinerator on site, and they were burning the residual, which was generating electricity, and that was powering the refuse collection vehicles as they went back round collecting more MSW. So it's a great example of the closed loop, circular economy, and so on. Now that was back in 1950. Right, so this stuff's been going on for a very long time, and I think what I've learned and what I see and what I hear is there isn't actually that much that's new. There's an interesting presentation yesterday from Vina, and that talks about the niche areas. But in terms of the big wins, we know what to do. We all know what to do. We're just going to do more of it, and that'll be one of my key messages today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. I'm sure there's lots of good questions you're jotting down as we go through, and our panel presenters make some commentary in relation to the future products from waste streams. Now I'd like to introduce Susie McBurney. Susie is the General Manager for New South Wales ACT for REMONDIS Australia. So in Susie's role, she looks after 12 sites and excess of 400 people statewide. So with over 15 years waste management and recycling industry experience, Susie's been employed in operational and management positions throughout New South Wales. She has a broad range of experience including liquid and hazardous waste, industrial services and the commercial and municipal sectors. So please welcome Susie.
Thank you very much. I was just telling Andy that my parents had a waste business when I was born, so I'm pretty much a lifer. So I've had the benefit of working in the very small, certainly that very small family business environment. We were fortunate enough to grow that business and sell that to a publicly listed waste company in Australia, which I was fortunate again to work there for approximately 9 years, and have recently joined REMONDIS. For those of you that don't know much about REMONDIS, we turn over $6.4 billion worldwide. We've got 30,000 employees, obviously with a head office and a really strong focus in Germany. We operate in 34 countries. We've got 448 plants and facilities, much similar to what Andy's saying. Look, we all know we can do these things across the globe. It's just a question of when is the right time for these things to come to Australia, and how can we work together about harnessing these new products. Again, REMONDIS would do 30 million tonnes of recycled and recovered material globally. I'm particularly just going to talk about the organics area. Globally, REMONDIS would do 3 million tonnes annually of whether we call it FOGO or GO or biosolids, so certainly very strong in that area globally, and something we're looking to work in this market about how we develop that. We have 60 facilities, which include the full range of the technologies available, so whether that be tunnel composting, anaerobic digestion, open windrows, and certainly with that global presence, we're well across the energy from waste options that we have. In Australia, we collect and recover 250,000 tonnes annually of FOGO, GO or biosolids from about 23 councils and approximately 3 million residents. In particular, most of you would have seen our Port Macquarie composting facility, which we've had established for over 10 years. And we are currently working very closely with Lake Macquarie Council with our contract to implement their composting solution. I guess part of the success we see with councils is we've seen some really excellent rollouts, and that's really a testament to the councils and how they've embraced that. And particularly with the education and the community engagement. I mean, we talk about contamination rates, and we're very fortunate in our councils that we're seeing around that, less than 1%. And we certainly believe, how we introduce that with a staggered approach to changing the garbage bin. I think we've all learnt some lessons about that. In terms of investment, there were some great presentations yesterday. I particularly enjoyed Angus's regarding there's a lot of solutions out there for composting, and as I mentioned, having 60 facilities globally, REMONDIS certainly has some experience in that area. I guess what we're saying is, look, we've got all the options available. It's really going to be about customising that for the council or for the site or for what they're looking for. I was really interested yesterday. I think we'll start to see some more hybrid solutions. Is it tunnel composting to start with, map at the back end, depending on your site. So I think we've got to be prepared to I don't think there's no one size fits all in that respect. And again, subject to your requirements regarding throughput or those type of issues. Look, as I mentioned before, our current councils experience a really low contamination rate, and it's a testament to their education and their rollouts. Contamination is an ongoing issue. Like we always say, it's easy to sort that out at the source rather than trying to get us to sort that out for you in the facility. The presentation yesterday, what Rob Nichols said, poor quality compost and poor quality products in the market is going to affect us all. So we talk about, the new products coming out of the waste stream. It's important that those products, that they get a good start, that when we do take them to market, that it is taken up by the community. Because at the end of the day, we can all produce something, but if we haven't got a sustainable market for it, that's going to be difficult long term for us all. And as I just mentioned, there's no better technology to deal with contamination than to be dealing with the source. So we really commend councils focusing on education and their engagement with the community. As we said before, challenges are always sites. We want to introduce these things, but we can all have, I'm sure, stories about DA approvals and trying to find the appropriate site to implement some of these larger scale technologies, whether it be energy from waste, etc. So like I said, I'm sure all of us would have similar issues, and I'm keen to hear more about what these guys have to say. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Susie. Now I'll introduce Sarah. So Sarah Crossie is the unit head of waste strategy in the New South Wales EPA. So Sarah's has led the development of many of the major regulatory reforms implemented in the waste space in the last 5 years, including leading the consultation and development of the energy from waste policy, which is now in place, and the 2014 waste regulation review. Would you please welcome Sarah?
Great to be the lone regulator on the panel. Look, I think one of the really interesting and challenging parts of my role as both a policymaker and a regulator in the waste space relates to the dynamic nature of waste, really. And I think that comes in two parts. Firstly, from the changing nature of the waste itself, and that's integrally linked to obviously product design and the way that flows through our waste streams. And some of those product designs that we're seeing now in terms of composite food packaging will impact our waste stream almost immediately. And others in terms of product design we'll see in terms of legacy issues over a long periods of time. And dare I mention the word asbestos or CCA treated timber, or even one of my personal favourites at the moment, CRT glass televisions. So even though we've got these changing products moving to plasma screens and LCDs and all the rest of it in the television space, for example, we will see these legacy issues from many years ago still impacting our waste stream. So certainly we will see change through our waste stream as a result of different products. And I think we also see it impacted by more broader trends, socio-demographic trends. So factors like that we have an ageing population is going to start impacting our waste stream. That particularly in Sydney that we have now a focus on, or the government has a focus on high density housing. How does that change our collection systems and also impact again on our waste and what we can do with it? And then the second main factor I think in this space is really around innovation and change in the waste sector itself and how the sector looks to reuse, recover and recycle those resources. And in the New South Wales space, we've obviously set very ambitious and strong targets for recovering resources from the waste stream. We've got a very blunt economic instrument to help it on its way. And we've invested, as Mark was saying at the beginning, significant amounts of money in infrastructure to drive those materials being used back into the productive economy. As a regulator, where that gets interesting is that interface between waste and resource and how we regulate those resources that are looking to be used back into the market. And first and foremost, our role as regulators is to manage risk and risk to the environment and human health. But I think also it's a function of the industry in a way that we're also regulating a market as well. And I think we see that within our latest regulations. So it's a very interesting space to work in, and that's why you've got so many people coming up to Coffs Harbour for a conference. And I think, you know, those changing natures and trends that we're going to see and that we are seeing means that it's a continual evolving process for both the industry and also for the regulator to respond to.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. We should just thank Sarah for that. Okay, our next speaker is Emmanuel Vivant, Executive Director of Suez Australia. So Emmanuel has more than 20 years of international experience in resource recovery and waste treatment within the global Suez Environment Group of companies. He has held the position of Executive Director of Infrastructure within the Australian business since 2001. Please welcome Emmanuel.
Thank you, Mark. Everybody is talking about circular economy, moving to the circular economy. But I've heard yesterday that the only way to do it is just to increase the levy. And this is Mike Ritchie. Mike is next door, so he cannot comment. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit more complex than that. But it's not enough. It's part of the of a solution, but it won't be sufficient. If we want to move into a circular economy, a true circular economy, this will have to be done in a collaborative way. And again, this is a word which has been pronounced several times yesterday. And when I mean collaboration, it should be collaboration between the regulator, the product design, product manufacturer, the waste management company, because they have the solution, the service to prepare product and not waste, to prepare product for the secondary raw material, and then the off-taker have also their part to play. And the only way to move into the circular economy and to reduce waste is to bring everybody together. As a waste management company, what do we have to do? We have to propose tool, solution, and to move from a waste manager to a product manufacturer, because we're here to manufacture product. And this is all together how we'll get there. And I want to give you a business case which has happened in Australia. We have in Adelaide, I believe, the largest C&I recycling facility in Australia. We are processing 180,000 tons of C&I waste per annum to produce fuel for a cement kiln, a local cement kiln for Adelaide Brighton Cement. But this did not happen overnight. It has been a long, long journey. And how we achieved this? It started more than 10 years ago as a pilot between Adelaide Brighton Cement and SITA Resource Co. We started on a small scale as true partner in order to see how we could produce low calorific material, wood-based, as a replacement for the gas that Adelaide Brighton Cement is using in their cement kiln in Adelaide. So we did 2 years trials, pilot, and then this was quite successful. We defined a specification. Again, it's about products, so we defined together a specification that they needed for their kiln and that we could achieve from a waste processor. Then we built a facility, and the partnership, and sorry, I've forgotten also the regulators. The EPA was part of it, obviously, from an emission perspective to define what was acceptable at the kiln. Then we established a facility. It was a significant investment, 15 million investment. We established a facility, and part of the facility was split in two parts: the pre-processing and the final preparation of the product. And for the final preparation of the product, it was a joint venture between SITA Resource Co. and ABC. So the cement kiln wanted to have a say on the quality of the product because for them they did not want to have any impact on the quality of the cement, obviously. So the facility, so we had obviously some commissioning issue and so on, but then after a few years, ABC being quite confident, they walked not away, but they sold their part of the joint venture to SITA Resource Co. So now we own 100% of the facility, and in exchange, we have a 15 years contract with Adelaide Brighton Cement. So long-term contract to supply a fuel to a specification. There are attached with the specification some penalty if we don't achieve the maximum level if we are above the maximum level of moisture of ash content, then we have some penalty. And more important, the fuel is recognized as a product. They pay for it. Okay? ABC is buying energy, so we are producing energy that we are selling to Adelaide Brighton Cement, and for them, because they don't need to purchase gas because they are this fuel. So the key for the success of this facility is collaboration, clear specification. We take the responsibility to manufacture a product specification. This is our commitment. Our commitment is to also supply 90,000 tons per annum of fuel, and they have a take-or-pay agreement, and we have a put-or-pay agreement. So responsibility on both parts of the line, and it's not a waste. It's recognized as a product. They pay for it, and I think this is a case that we should replicate if we want to move in a true circular economy, and this is how. But it won't happen overnight. It's not simply increasing the levy and the waste management facility. The waste management company won't be able to invest, tens of millions of dollars if there is no certainty also in terms of regulation on what do we do with the product. It should be a pull market, not a push market. If we increase the levy, it will be only a push market, so we will build facility, we'll process material, but what we do with the material. So it has to be a push market from the off-taker.
Wonderful. Good point to end on. Thank you, Emmanuel. So just to those of you standing at the back, there's actually a little bit of room in the front if you'd like to come through. There's quite a few seats at the front, so it's a little bit of time to stand on your feet back there. Thanks, Emmanuel. Now I'd like to welcome David Clancy. David's the General Manager of Cleanaway in New South Wales. So David looks after the 23 sites and in excess of 700 people statewide for the Cleanaway New South Wales business. With over 20 years waste management and recycling industry experience, David has been employed in operational and management positions locally, interstate and internationally, focusing heavily on the municipal sector. Would you please welcome David?
Sorry, thanks everyone. I thought sitting next to Mark I'd go first and my notes would be fresh, and but sitting this end I've come last. So just maybe rephrasing the question that Mark initially put to us about when is waste not a waste, and I guess for me it's when you can extract some value out of the outputs, and that may be a current value or it may be something in the future. So Boona spoke yesterday about a project which was commenced some time ago where the vision was that there was a material somewhere in a circuit board or somewhere in a raw material and some value in that and an output, and that they as an organisation, smart organisation, went through and extracted that. But that took some time. So initially it was a waste, time allowed, technology caught up, commercial viability caught up with it. So there was real drivers in there, and it wasn't that push mechanism that was happening, it was really a drag through from a manufacturer who was looking for an input into their process. So I guess it's how you can extract value out of it, and extracting value, there's two elements of it. There has to be raw material that has to be collected and aggregated or sorted out into separate streams, and then there has to be a market at the other end. The panel has spoken well about a number of examples around, and even from my own TPI business, the circular economy is alive in there. And our landfill at Erskine Park, we went into partnership with Austral Bricks in this case, and again it was a process that went through a lot of consultation. We've constructed a pipeline over 2 kilometres between our landfill facility for extraction of landfill gas. We had the option of putting engines in there or flaring. Flaring's obviously no good. So the engines were one option, but then a higher use of the material was actually to consult with an industrial partner, work through the planning process, work through their environment team, work with their kiln manufacturer or their kiln people about the injection. But importantly, from a waste company, there was a massive commitment on our part to go in and say, we can actually supply a reliable resource into your manufacturing organisation. So we had to really stand back and say, can we commit to them turning off their AGL supply for a certain portion of that material and commit to providing a steady stream of landfill gas out of our facility for a long period of time. So that it is possible to generate those sort of circular economies, but as Emmanuel just mentioned it's an enormous leap of faith for many organisations, and the waste industry has not typically been known as a resource provider across the country. But things are changing in that sort of space. But if I could just talk about the other aspect of extracting the value is once the other side is what do you actually do with it once you've got it in a form that you can trade with it, or you can ship it to someone or provide it to it. And that's where commodity markets become really important to us here in Australia. We're a small country in the world stage in terms of our output and our generation. We can't influence people. So when we talk about, say, paper quality, we're not a big enough player in the marketplace to really drive many levers through China to say, well, really we'd like to make the bales this big, or we'd like to send this with the bale. We're really a taker on the international market. And you might be interested to know that over 12% of the outgoing sea freight, container freight out of the Sydney Wharf is recycled commodities, mainly paper. So there's an enormous amount of volume that gets traded out of Australia, but it's small on a world scale. But I mentioned that and I mentioned China because they are of an important market for us, as is Indonesia and these other Asian countries for taking some off products out of here. And again, it's that consultation and work with the mills. With TPI, we have an international trading commodity desk and a team of people who travel the world talking to mills, talking to manufacturing plants around the world and presenting products to them and saying, can you do anything with this? And we think this would add value to your place. What do you need from us? And that's where Steve talked. One of the challenges we will face in a resource commodity-driven industry that the waste industry is heading towards is us getting our minds around what it really means to be a commodity supplier or a resource supplier in an international stage. So a manufacturing plant in Asia is looking to us because we have cheaper freight costs, so our unit costs are lower. But they're really after that security demand, security supply, and also quality. The quality aspects vital, and it really is, from the moment the product gets put out on the curbside, makes an enormous impact on what the product appears in a milling in Guangzhou or somewhere. So everyone along the chain, it's a commitment from everyone in the value chain. It's a commitment from the people who generate the waste, you know, collectors, sorters, the quality standards of regulators, making sure that we're meeting our social and environmental obligations. We're dealing with reputable markets. We're not sending material off to a third world developing country because it's convenient or it's cheap, but it's really about acting in a global economy, identifying outputs for our material, and then working hard to, you know, whether it's clever ideas that Vina was talking about yesterday, or whether it's just the mechanics of our sorting facilities and our process facilities that we have to then develop to match our markets.
Excellent. Would you thank David for that? Okay, thank you, panel, for those really insightful sort of crystal ball gazing, you know, into the future, and also looking at the present and the range of opportunities and also challenges. So it's really over to the audience now. I hope everyone's been jotting down some good questions, and maybe even a couple of tricky questions for the panel of speakers today. So we have a roving mic, which will be available. If you could just state your name and your organisation, please, and before you state your question, that would be fantastic. So, questions? Okay, lady just down the front here, please.
Hi, Rebecca. Sorry about that. Rebecca Brown at WA Local Government Association. Thank you very much to the panel. It's great to see a regulator on the panel. Really appreciate you coming out. Our regulator side is anyway. My question is, how do we influence product design so that at end of life it's easier for the product to become a resource? At the moment it seems very much like the waste industry is doing all the hard work and putting all the effort into making something product, and the producers really aren't kind of considering it.
So maybe Sarah, if you could grab that first. I'm sure the other panel members might like to contribute too. Sorry, can we have the mic at the front activated, please?
I guess I'll start off. I absolutely agree. I think product stewardship has a very big role to play, and to date it's really in its infancy in Australia. I think it's fair to say that. We've only had a national legislative framework for product stewardship since 2011. We've got one co-regulatory scheme and I think 3 registered voluntary schemes. But we certainly need to see a greater burden of responsibility put on product designers. And the other method is through, dare I say, the Australian Packaging Covenant, which also has a role in perhaps not legislative, but in driving business to look at product design and manufacturing and putting an onus and a responsibility on them to reduce certainly the hazardous, and I think product stewardship schemes to date have really had a focus on hazardous components in terms of their composition, but I think that has to shift as well to not looking just at hazardous and problematic waste streams from that angle, but also problematic waste that will be generated and becomes contaminants or even just part of the waste stream when it hits the end of life. So it's a national issue, and it's one that the Australian government and I think broader industry leadership is very much needed on.
Just one point, I guess, we're all out producing some outputs, and procurement plays a large part in this, and people in this room, local government and state governments and federal governments have a part to play as well. So looking at recycling components in the procurement strategy and returning material, so we generate a lot of compost, using your own generated material on your own parks and gardens and the likes of that will also help develop some of those markets locally.
Andy, do you want to say a couple of words? Yep.
Yeah, just a couple of points on that as well. I mean, it's ultimately about education. I think what we're seeing in the UK is we spend a lot of time in dialogue, as I know all the other large waste management companies do as well, a lot of time in dialogue with large supermarkets, for example, really understanding how packaging can be reduced. But it's really down to those guys, the supermarkets and the other retailers, to put the pressure further back up the supply chain. There's a limit to what we can do. And I think the other part of the education is actually really starting to explain to people, the general public, because that clearly drives the pressure as well, what a value chain actually means. You know, what does a circular economy mean? What does it really look like when you've disposed of your element of the value chain? What actually happens all the way through? And we're seeing more of that happening in the UK now, but we could definitely do with a lot more of it.
Yeah, it's about education of the manufacturer, but education of the public, or education of all of us in the room, as a consumer, but also as a waste generator. And back to the presentation of Rob Nicol yesterday regarding FGO and the quality of FGO and the level of contamination. And this is something we're experiencing because we are facility processing FGO, and the level of contamination is very high, because people simply use their green bin when the red bin is full, and they don't really care. But you just need a battery or a bit of asbestos or whatever to ruin the entire batch of product.
Fantastic. Thanks for that question, Rebecca. Can I have another question from the floor? Maybe just down the back. John?
John Wheat, Resource Recovery Australia. Emmanuel, I think you were saying that, you know, I'm not sure that you were saying that the levy didn't have a role, but if you were, I'd certainly take you to task on that. However, I might ask you to comment on, you emphasised the importance of collaboration. Perhaps you could reflect on what are the regulatory environments perhaps which might stimulate collaboration?
Just, I will comment it. On the levy, I'm not saying the levy does not have any impact, but again, if you take the case of South Australia, the levy is at $54 a tonne in South Australia, and we have a facility which is working in South Australia in such an environment. Okay, we'd prefer a higher levy, but what I have said. So regarding the role of the regulator, I think the regulator has a role to play, I believe, in the end product. I think we need to have some clear rule on the end product, and when a waste is not a waste anymore. And today there is, I think, the temptation is to consider that we judge a product by its origin. At the origin, it's a waste, so it's a waste all the way. And this is where I think we need to change this. The regulator, talking about, for example, AWT or FGO. We have a product, and we had, for the AWT, we have to work with EPA to define a specification for the compost and the use of the compost. And the problem on this one, so we had today the general exemption, but again, it's a general exemption, so it's considered as a waste. And we should judge a product by its quality, by its specification. It does not, for me, it's not because it's coming from a waste, it's how it looks like at the end. What is the specification? What is the intrinsic quality of the product?
Thanks, Emmanuel. Sarah, did you want to reflect on the other side of the coin? Trying to be balanced here.
I guess what I'd say is, in relation to the crux of the question, which is about when does a waste stop being a waste, I think that one is a question of law. So in terms of our legal frameworks, when is a waste? And that's a legal question. And I'll reflect on that a little bit later. And I think the other part is how the market views that. So regardless of how the regulator views it, does the market value that material as a resource, or are they suspicious or seeing that as a waste product? In terms of the former and how the law defines it in New South Wales, I think regulators all around the world struggle with this issue because in terms of the definition of waste, it's very broad, and it's very broad in pretty much every jurisdiction. So it's in New South Wales, it's any unwanted, surplus, abandoned, there's a few more in there that have escaped my memory, but it's very broad, and it can capture a lot of things, but there's also a lot of grey area in there, and kind of purposely so. If you force a regulator into a corner and make black and white determinations, you may not be that happy with the black and white determinations that get made. And it's a delicate act then of providing certainty and clarity for industry versus ending up in those box situations that you really don't, neither the regulator nor the market wants to be operating under. What we've done in New South Wales, mainly through our resource recovery exemption mechanism, is to put a part of the definition of waste which says basically if it's waste or waste derived, doesn't matter what you do to it, if you're applying it to land or using it as fuel, which we see as the two highest risk avenues in terms of contaminants and an impact on the environment and human health, then that remains a waste. But we've also built in an exemption mechanism in relation to those uses such that we can grant what we call resource recovery exemptions to enable the use of those materials in markets. And yes, they retain their legal definition as a waste, but they lose all the requirements that come along with that. So you don't need a licence to use them, you don't need to report to us, you don't need to pay the levy on them, etc. I know for a lot of people they think that's not going far enough. We want them to be determined not to be a waste. My question would be whether or not the degree of impact that has in a market, and I think for some markets it probably has very little impact, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe in others it has significant impact in terms of the market wanting to use that product. But as I said, regulators around the world struggle with this issue. So in Europe they have the end of waste criteria, which came into effect the same time as our exemption mechanism in 2008. To my understanding, there's really only 3 waste products that have been given end of waste criteria status across Europe, which are fairly benign materials such as scrap aluminium and ferrous, scrap copper, and I think glass colour is also under consideration. And they've been looking at since 2010 whether or not to go down the route of making an RDF or an SRF specification from end of waste criteria. So it's not a simple answer, and even when they've taken that step of defining something as end of waste, it's still very limited, the scope of materials that we're seeing sitting in that basket. Are we, as New South Wales, going to go down that path of being able to delineate waste materials as no longer being waste? I think we've taken a big step since 2008 in terms of our exemptions, and we have 37 general exemptions for a range of materials. Yes, it's something that we would look at, but I think it would be a very controlled process because as a regulator we are looking at risk, and the reason we went the exemption pathway rather than an end of waste pathway is that it's easier for us in a legal sense to keep those materials in the system, if you like, if things go wrong. So I don't know what I'm talking about anymore, but
That's right, you can stop there, Sarah, if you
I'll
like.
stop.
That's good. I think that's a very good question, John, because at the end of the day, the legal framework is quite critical to our industry and to give certainty to markets in relation to the use of future products or waste materials. I was just wondering, Andy, did you want to reflect on the European situation and how collaboration between the waste generator or the processor and the regulator is driving reforms?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. I wanted to come in on that point because there's a couple of points I'd make. For me, the role of government is to help and assist in creating a market or to fix a market when it's not working correctly. Once that's happened, stop tinkering would be my advice. And I'm a big fan of the regulator, to be clear. We have a very positive and engaged relationship with the regulator, and you need that, as Emmanuel spoke about at the start. Everybody's involved. We're all key stakeholders here. But that said, you know, it concerns me, and we see this in Europe, where the regulators, the authorities are trying to define what an RDF should be or what an SRF should be. You don't need to do that because the end consumer has already defined it. And we're interested in supplying the end consumer with that product. Material, fuel, whatever you want to call it. I fully understand that there's a need to monitor the environmental impact, absolutely, and that should be the role of the regulator once the market's been created, in my opinion. At the end of the day, the market will drive the rest of it. As Emmanuel's already alluded to, you know, we're seeing a positive price being paid for fuels now. And you could also argue that there's a significant environmental benefit because they're replacing fossil fuels, which in turn is also reducing the NOx and SOx emissions. So I don't think we should get too hung up about the fact that fuel or recovery is actually a key part of the mix of solutions that are required. It really is a key element. The other thing I'd just very quickly like to reflect on as well is the landfill levy. You may well know that we've had the landfill tax in the UK over the last 10 years or so. It's ratcheted up at £8 a year every year, and it's now finished. It sits at £80 a tonne, plus the cost of the landfill, so it's a pretty significant driver. And what we found was that around about £64 a tonne was the kind of tipping point where the gate fees into our facilities weren't linked to landfill rates anymore. I was looking back at some figures for kind of 2011, 2012, and the gate fees we were getting into our facilities then are not particularly different to what they are now. And what struck me coming to Australia, certainly to New South Wales, is that the levy here, I think, is $120, going up to $130, which, broadly speaking, is equivalent to the £64 a tonne level that we had in the UK that was the tipping point. And it feels like it's the tipping point now here in New South Wales. But I recognise it's not a federal position, but a state position.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. This lady down the back, Esther.
Thanks very much. Esther Bailey. I run a programme called the Better Buildings Partnership. It's a collaboration between about 20 of the major institutional property owners across the country. $107 billion worth of assets in retail and office. So quite a lot of turnover and refurbishment, a lot of engineered timbers, and pretty poor recovery rates right now, but a commitment to really try and raise the bar on that. So I'm trying to understand, just picking up on these themes about the collective. I have got a collective. They are keen to participate. How can we best engage with you to maximise the highest and best reuse for these materials?
David, did you want to kick that off in terms of recovery of defit and fit-out waste and broadly other opportunities that your business is looking at?
Yeah, thanks, Esther. And I think the Better Building Partnerships, for those who are not aware of it, is a really collaborative team of people who are working, and they have held some industry days, and we've participated in those with some of our people who've gone along to really look at some of the frameworks around that partnership. And I think that's the key thing, I think, from my view, is continue that consultation and reach out to the industry at all stakes. And when you find someone from one of our organisations, obviously it'll be mine, but one of our organisations maybe actually quite can get the picture and understand what your needs are. It's all about that consultation to me. Once you've got that, then the key deliverables then come in about our resources, and education is then a key factor I find with building partnerships, and whether it be office building or shopping centres, hospitals or any of those sorts of things. There are lots of challenges in there, and it's about keeping a very simple, repetitive message going through the education to separate, to do as much as they can to minimise and separate at the building phase. And then it's working with some of your problem waste that you made, whether it be fluorescent tubes or whatever it is coming out of the building centre, then working with some of the partners up on the stage here about proper outputs for them. And there are lots of innovative solutions around the place. So.
With regard to the engineered timbers, I mean, in the context of this fuel conversation, do we think that they are a viable input? I mean, in a sense, they're quite predictable, but, I also hear, it's post-consumer, it's coming from different places, it's got laminates, it's got those kind of things. Are those problems solvable as far as you're concerned with your technologies?
Me again, is it?
Yeah.
Yes is the short answer to that. I mean, I'm a pretty kind of simple person, really, and at the end of the day, you're going to extract the value that you can. Recycling has a better value than fuels, despite the fact that we are getting paid for the fuels. At the end of the day, it is about meeting the specification. Can't emphasise that enough. It has to be driven by the consumer, the end consumer's specification. And to meet that specification, what we're learning, we're still on the journey in the UK and Europe, it's about the blend of fuels, it's about the feedstock quality, which we've already heard about. That's true in fuels just as it is in recyclates. And then how you process those fuels. But yeah, it shouldn't be too challenging. But I'm happy to talk afterwards and understand more detail as to what your feedstock is.
Okay, we've got another question from Jeff.
Can I just say, I haven't got that level of granularity. I can't say it. I can't even say it, but I liked it, so I'm going to use it.
Esther, if I can just jump in there too, I was fortunate. We've got some people from REMONDIS Germany that are actually based with us at Mascot, and I was talking to him last night, and he said, Susie, you forget, we have 8 bins for, on a customer's site for collection. So you talk about, engineered timbers and your laminates and the products is, we're not there yet. We're not there yet in terms of that source separation, in terms of that scale. But, think about where we are globally, that they've got that scale, they've got that separation to be able to pull apart the issues we have on sites and to create those products and be working with, the large-scale facilities that are taking an RDF. REMONDIS in Germany currently produces 250,000 tonnes per annum of RDF for the facilities over there. So it's certainly something we're familiar with. And again, keen to work with industry and work with our regulators about how we see that translating into the Australian market.
Excellent. Thanks, Susie. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you. My question is actually for Andy. I mean, everybody in the room here is actually, because we're an emerging industry in RDF, SRF. Just quickly, can you tell us what to look for in the pitfalls and some of the mistakes you guys may have made in the UK that we need to look out for? Because, say, everybody wants this, but we've also got to be careful because if it starts and stops, it may never start again. So just if you could sort of just give us 1 or 2 examples of what the pitfalls are and what we need to be careful about.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I'm not sure we've enough time to talk about all the mistakes we made, and we have on the journey, and we're still on it. And Dave talked earlier on about just really learning as you're developing, and it's quite a scary place for traditional waste management companies to be. We're used to the linear model that was talked about yesterday. You collect it, you stick it in a hole in the ground. It's like winning the lottery, frankly. It's a really simple business. And we're now having to move into a manufacturing mindset. That requires different people quite often in your business who bring that production mentality. So that's a key part. And I think it's really about, first of all, you have got to understand your consumer and what they need, and then get very comfortable with the fact that you can consistently produce and meet their specification, because these guys are used to very consistent fuels in this particular instance. And it is quite a scary place to be, because A, you've got to know you're going to make that specification, and you're doing new things you haven't tried before. And you're talking about long-term commitments, long-term contracts in a lot of cases. The primary driver for these guys actually is fuel security. It's not so much about the price. Clearly they want discounts against the fossil fuel, we can get that and we can deliver that, but actually it is about fuel security. Because if you don't supply it, that cement kiln's going down, and that's going to cost millions of dollars on a daily, weekly basis. I think the other key element for me is logistics. That component in the value chain and the supply chain will make or break the profitability of your business, quite frankly. Once you get around the production stage and you get to a steady state, that's relatively straightforward. I hesitate to say that because it's still quite tough, quite challenging. But you can play with that as an art to it, if you like. But it's very, very easy to lose an awful lot of money on the logistics. You don't get your bulk density right, you don't pack the material right. Maybe your bales break in the ports when they're unloaded, and then you've got a reputational risk. And that's the biggest concern for companies of our size. It's actually the reputational risk. But we keep going with it. We've got a very supportive group in our case, and I'm sure that's the case for the rest of the panel as well. because we know that it is the future. It's the way things are going to go.
Thank you, Andy. Good question, Jeff, about pitfalls. We can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters in Europe. Just down here, if we can have the microphone. Angus, I think you're itching to ask a question. Thank you. Thanks, Angus.
Thanks. Just a little definition to start my question. So, this industry's primarily been involved in treatment, landfilling, that side of things, and there's companies that in the panel have been involved in that. And then there's another side that's turned up in more recent times, which we're talking about today, going to a product, the value adding step, and talking a bit about it just then. What I'm concerned about, or what I see as the challenge at the moment, is the amount of investment going in A, treatment and disposal, compared to B, making a product. And I think the split's pretty uneven at the moment, and it's quite a difficult business going into B, making a product. So my question is two parts. What's the split at the moment in your company between investment in treatment versus making a product? And how would we get more investment going into making a product?
Emmanuel, yeah, you're welcome to kick it off.
Look, I don't know the split, and I won't try to guess. What do we need to make investment? To make investment, we need to have certainty on the business model. And back to the comment on the levy. Again, if you are manufacturing a product, you will get the revenue from the product. The problem is with taking the risk on the commodity, okay, on the long term. And why the Adelaide example has been and is successful. Again, we have a 15 years commitment. Take the fuel, minimum quantity of fuel at a set price. So then, you know the model. Sourcing the waste, it's our traditional business, but when it comes to the commodity, we are prepared to take some risk, but certainly not taking 100% of the risk forever. And this is why I'm talking about collaboration with all stakeholders. It's a collaboration as well on offtake of the product on the long term, whether 15 years is an extreme, but 5, 10 years. Otherwise, why you would invest $20 million? No board will give you an approval to invest on a merchant plant without certainty on quality of the product, off-taker, and revenue on the long term. So again, if we are waiting and expecting the waste management company, to solve the circular economy on themselves, no, I say it's all stakeholders have to participate, and we are ready, prepared, to take it for Suez. I don't know what is the position of the other. We are ready to take our share of the risk, but we have to share the risk.
Thanks, Emmanuel. David, did you want to comment? I mean, your company's investing quite a bit in infrastructure and further value adding and processing.
Yeah, and just I guess on the back of Emmanuel's point there about the commodity, when you look at some of these investments that we're lining up for at the moment, they're significant, as you would all know in the room, and commodity prices underpin that. But when you look at the fall off in, say, PET in the last 12 months, has dropped by 58%. So your modelling you did 2 years ago is now out of date. We collect and refine about 2.5 million barrels of oil, waste oil, across the eastern seaboard. Now, we're all enjoying great oil prices in our cars, but for me as an oil producer across eastern Australia, it's been an absolute nightmare. So we're really going into that. We're talking about that, entering that manufacturing. Our businesses, we're developing those models around the risk profile and the commodity profile, and how we offset some of that risk around the commodity challenges, because they are long-term investments and the commodity price plays such a large part in it. So it is about risk, and it is about taking a step. But we all want to do it. We all understand it. But it is a competitive capital. So your initial question about the split between the two, I'd suggest we're not quite there of moving it to a heavy manufacturing point of view because of that risk profile. We still have to maintain a risk base, I guess, on our standard business and our standard operating model. but there's more funds becoming available, and I'd say, speak on most of the panel, coming available within that processing stream.
Thanks, David. Susie, did you want to add any further comments? I mean, your company's investing a lot in further processing and product development.
Yeah, just take on what Angus's comment and probably what David said earlier. I think a lot of people in this room can assist with that product development. To talk about the procurement piece is a big thing. I mean, Emmanuel said these are long-term investments with significant capital. You do need an anchor client, so I think local government and councils here certainly have a role to play, whether it be taking back a compost from a facility, simple things like that. We can look at how we can work with you and develop a product. So I think we will see that move towards investing in that type of space. But again, I think we all have a role to play, and there's certainly got to be collaboration between the waste producers and the waste processors. But more so, we're producing a product here that needs to be sold. It has to be sustainable, and I think we all have to work together in that. As we've said, there's nothing worse than having a couple false starts, whether it be for RDF or we talk about poor quality compost. And as an industry, we've got a responsibility. At the end of the day, Sarah has a role as a regulator, but sometimes we've got to take responsibility as an industry to produce a quality product. Yes, there'll be some rogues out there, those type of things, but I think we've certainly got a part to play, as do our industry partners and our local government people as well.
Thanks, Susie. Now we have time for one more question. So who's got a quick hand? Alex, over to you. Just the mic down here. Thank you.
And a lot of these products will be going to Asia, where most of the big industrial fuel consumers are. So I'd be curious to know, in regulating these products, are you just creating a commercial incentive to push them into overseas markets?
It's a very good question. And it's a difficult ethical question, I think, as well. Yes, you're right, our regulation ends at state borders. Does that mean that we should drop our regulatory standards so that that material remains in New South Wales but in somewhat of a similar standard to what it might be used in other jurisdictions? Well, clearly not. I think we have very strong expectations from the community, rightly so, that particularly in the SRF and RDF space, that those materials will be used at facilities which have best available control technologies and techniques in place to manage the emissions and so on that's produced from them. It's not a new question in terms of any environmental regulation or even in terms of manufacturing and the push that's seen going offshore as well. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. There's got to be a strong corporate social responsibility placed on companies, and a lot of the companies that are looking to play in that space in any meaningful way are large multinational companies. So I think there's got to be some pressure exerted on those companies from a consumer or broader community perspective about what's happening to those materials.
Thanks, Sarah. Andy, did you want to reflect on that? Because, I mean, sounds like you're exporting, fuel, across Europe for use in other countries.
No, we are. I mean, we've got production capacity across our recycled wood, RDF and SRF of just around 2 million tonnes. And bearing in mind 5 years ago, we had no production capacity at all. We've gone very deep into these different sectors, and we're really focusing on the SRF now. I'm not sure why we get too hung up about it, actually, if I'm honest with you. As long as, you're quite rightly saying, there's the environmental controls there, and the end markets we're going to are using the best available technology, which in most cases they are. When you look at what's happening in China and in India, they are emerging markets, and they have gone out and bought the best available technology. Why wouldn't they? If I take the cement market as a good example, there's 4 billion tonnes of cement produced every year. 58% of that is in China. Right? It is a phenomenal number. The second largest market is India at 7%, 300 million tonnes a year. 300 million tonnes is greater than the whole of the EU put together in terms of production capacity, to give some idea of scale. So when we talk about having a pull model, you have to go to where the markets are. There's no point in regulating and keeping things within borders because there are no markets at a local level. I mean, the UK production capacity for cement is 10 million tonnes. It's negligible, it's irrelevant, frankly, on a world scale. So as long as there is that complete visibility across the supply chain and the end consumption, and absolutely the onus is on us with our CSR to make sure that that's happening. It shouldn't be the regulator's responsibility to police it all the way through. That is absolutely our responsibility. I don't see an issue with it. And if we're talking about products and we're talking about commodities, we do it with lots of other commodities. Why shouldn't we do it with these?
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
I think that the media has a role too, mate. Making sure that doesn't happen.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's been a fantastic discussion. I've got a whole bunch of points and discussion, issues I'd love to raise with the panel afterwards. So thank you for all the fantastic questions and your participation this morning. Would you please thank our panel?